Sean Ross Sapp of the Wrestling Inc. podcast here with a very special guest. This is an interview I've wanted to nail down for quite a while. You all will know him as former WWE superstar Muhammad Hassan. Mark Kapani, how are you doing?
Good, Sean. Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the reasons why I thought this was a timely interview, an interesting interview. Obviously, we have you portrayed a gimmick in WWE that was very controversial at the time, and now we have a guy like Donald Trump running for president who kind of thrives on some of the things that your character spoke out against in storyline. I know this is a little not related to wrestling. How do you feel about something like that?
Well, in 2005, when Sean Daivari and I did the character, I'd say anti-Islamic feelings were relatively new in this country. There hadn't been any very many major terroristic threats or events that took place on United States soil, with the exception of the World Trade Center bombing in 2001. Was it 2000? Yeah, 2001. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm getting off track here. But with someone like Donald Trump and everything that he's saying, I feel like our country is now at this time, 10 years removed from 2005, slowly kind of ready for the anti-political correctness to come across the airwaves. I feel like that's why a lot of people are embracing Donald Trump. So like I said, back in 2005, it was relatively new. 2001, the World Trade Center bombings kind of sparked this anti-Islamic, anti-Arab feelings. But now the United States has kind of settled into it. And I think that a lot of people are intrigued and kind of, I guess, impressed, for lack of a better term, with how ballsy Donald Trump is.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, especially for that time, this was an extremely controversial gimmick. What were your thoughts when they pitched that gimmick to you?
I liked it. I mean, I think I always had a feeling that it could wind up bad, and they prepared me as well as they could for what could happen and what will happen, but nobody really was prepared for what actually did happen. But my initial thoughts were, it's good heat. Jim Cornette was one of the guys who pitched it to me, and he's right. It's sustainable heat. I mean, there's obviously have been with the Iron Sheik, there have been, xenophobic fears of people different, in this country for a very long time, but this was new, and it was a fresh take on the Muslim gimmick, the Arab gimmick. So I thought it was cool, man. I was definitely ready. I definitely wanted to do it.
Yeah, the character started out insanely hot. And you were protected. You weren't beaten, things like that. Was that something that they tell you ahead of time? Hey, we're going to strap the rocket ship to you. You're going to be heavily protected.
No, because I don't think that's anything they really know ahead of time. They may have in the back of their mind, like, this is a character we could shoot to the moon, but you never know exactly how it's going to come off to the fans or how that character is going to interact with the fans or even other wrestlers. So, no, nobody told me that. I mean, I was aware that there'd be a huge push. I knew there'd be a push. They push a lot of new characters right out of the gate. But as far as what ultimately happened, I wasn't aware nor really prepared for it.
So, I mean, as that push was happening, what was the reception like backstage? I mean, you were a young guy, pretty young to the business, and you were getting big push, prominent position. Was there any backlash backstage over that?
Yeah, there's backlash, with really anybody new coming up. I mean, that's just part of the process. With a character like that does start out hot, it's usually not from the top guys. It's usually your mid-card guys that you kind of feel that heat from backstage. The top guys are kind of settled in. They're comfortable. Their spot isn't really going anywhere. It's the mid-card guys who kind of feel slighted, overlooked. So there was plenty of backlash, but, you learn to take it in stride. And I think with this character and at this particular time and this particular push, I think there was a lot more than you would see typically. And, you know, some of that I put on myself as well. I was young. I was, you know, maybe overconfident and I definitely didn't handle things the way I would handle them now, looking back at it, 10 years, in the future. So, yeah, but there was a lot of heat associated on stage and off stage with that gimmick.
And, of course, there was the controversial angle that led to UPN asking your character to be pulled off TV. How are you informed of something like that? What did you feel going into that angle? And who tells you that type of thing? Who says, hey, you're not allowed to be on the air anymore?
I think it was Johnny Ace, who's the head of talent relations at the time, told, Sean and I what was going on. I mean, we were well aware. We knew we weren't going to be allowed back on television. At the time, initially, we were going to fight it. We were going to do, publicity, talk shows. I got that promo in the ring. But eventually we kind of realized that even if we fought it, we weren't welcome on Spike, which was showing Raw at the time, or UPN, which was showing SmackDown. We knew that we'd be very limited. So we knew that character, I don't remember exactly how I found out, but within a few weeks after the Undertaker segment, we knew that character just could not come back in that way back to WWE TV.
So at what point did you decide, maybe because they ran a story on WWE.com saying that you all would be reassigned to OVW. Obviously, that didn't necessarily go down that way for you. What made you decide to not do that?
No, I had just moved from Louisville maybe 8 or 9 months prior. And I don't know, we weren't assigned to OVW. I was never assigned to OVW. It could have been an option. I also knew I was made aware that it would be a while before I'd be brought back up. I was told that explicitly, and I guess nobody really knows, but at the same time, the character hit so quickly and so hard that from what I could gather, it'd be very difficult to kind of spin that character into something that people could believe or gain heat again. But ultimately, my experience in that last year and what I had seen, it just, I don't want to say I didn't want to come back, because I would have if something had come up in the immediate future. But eventually I realized that I needed to move on from wrestling for my own good.
And have you ever considered returning? Have you had any offers or any conversations with WWE since then?
Not with the WWE. I mean, I've had plenty of offers from other organizations, but not with the WWE. Again, I mean, I would say that was more my choice than anything, but seeing what I saw, the 5 years that I was in wrestling, it's one of those, for me personally, what I feel, and again, I don't speak for everybody, obviously, but what I personally felt was that wrestling was the kind of career that if you held on to it for too long, you'd wake up and you'd be 50 years old and you'd wonder, where the last 25 years went. So I made a decision when I decided finally that I wasn't going to wrestle anymore, that I wasn't going to wrestle anymore. And part of how I withdrew from all of that was the conscious decision to move on with my life, because I feel that it's very dangerous to spend your present focused on your past and not your future.
And I mean, WWE Network has blown up and things like that. Have they contacted you about maybe appearing on a WWE Network program to talk about anything like that?
No, I haven't been. Nope.
That's actually kind of interesting. And is wrestling something that you follow? I mean, we've heard stories and rumors that maybe wrestling wasn't your true passion.
It was at the time. It definitely is not now. I don't watch, and it's just because I honestly don't have time to watch. But wrestling at the time, it was my passion, but I would say, yeah, it's definitely not my passion now. I've moved on with my life. It takes a very special person to be like a Triple H or a Shawn Michaels or a John Cena or a Randy Orton. I would say that of all the people who wrestle, very few make it their lifelong career successfully. So it was my passion at the time, but I have no problem saying now that I was not one of those people. I definitely was not the kind of person that can make wrestling a successful career for 25 years, like Undertaker or Kane or any of those guys.
And also after your wrestling career, there was, of course, the Assassin and Son Path of Vengeance graphic novel you did with Shad Gaspard. Is that still something you're actively pursuing? And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was an original script that Shad had written, gave it to me. And at the time I was living in LA, and that's kind of what I was doing. I was writing and rewriting scripts, nothing major. And so I rewrote it and I added, and it became a different story. And Shad is more actively pursuing that. Shad, I don't know if I'm sure you're aware, has been doing great work. He's been in films. I just watched him the other night in Get Hard. He's a fantastically talented individual. And I think right now he's focusing on his acting career. He put a lot of effort into getting Assassin and Son, somewhat published. We were up and down. I mean, it's a tough business, it's something I think that he's actively pursuing in the future, but I think we put it on hold because I have a different career and Shad has his acting career that's starting to take off. But, I had a great time. Shad's a good friend. Shad's a great guy. And so I hope that someday in the future, him and I can work together on this, whether it be producing it as a graphic novel or a film, which is what our original, focus was. But yeah, right now it's kind of been put on the back shelf. So hopefully we'll get it going again soon. It's a timeless story. So whether we do it now or 10 years from now, it's really not going to change much of the screenplay.
Shane Helms once talked about you trying to make peace with wrestlers in Tokyo, but there was maybe some blowback or some refusal. What was your reaction to that, and is that story true?
What I remember about Tokyo, the story is Eddie Guerrero used the camel clutch. That was my finisher. Kurt Angle got in my ear and was like, Eddie shouldn't be using your finisher. That's disrespectful to the business. Not to Eddie, because it had nothing to do with Eddie, but you shouldn't let someone else use your finisher. You have to say something. You're a top guy. You have to say something. And so this is Kurt Angle. So, of course, I do what Kurt tells me, and I say something to Eddie. Lo and behold, I think it was Eddie's father who invented the camel clutch. So I felt like a gigantic asshole. And I got some heat for it in Japan, in Tokyo, for that. As far as making peace and not working, I mean, I think for that I picked up like a $2,000 bar tab, and that was kind of the last I heard of it. I mean, I'm not discrediting Shane's story. I'm saying he may remember it differently than I do, but that was the heat I got. And ultimately, in the end, everybody knew it was Kurt that put me up to it. And that doesn't mean I shouldn't have had the common sense to not listen. But everybody knew, I remember even Big Show made a comment to Kurt, like, are you getting him in trouble again? Like, everybody kind of knew that didn't come from me. But I paid for it, and I kind of tried to take it in stride. I didn't read Shane's story. This is the first I'm hearing about it, so I can't really comment on what he said. I'm sure Shane may have had a different take. I honestly don't know how to respond to that other than say that was what happened. I never in a million years would have dreamed of telling Eddie Guerrero not to do anything because he was, Eddie was a god. But I felt like I had to, and it was like, I swear, I'm almost positive Kurt said something to the effect of like, well, no one's going to think you're a pussy, but it was like a wink, wink. Like everybody's going to think you're a pussy. You have to do it. And I remember I went to court, and I think Undertaker and Shane McMahon, and it was a pretty big deal. I was obviously nervous, but looking back on it, I think that most people knew that needed to know that I didn't do that on my own, that I was put up to it by Kurt. So again, Shane's a good dude. I mean, I'm sure he remembers it the way he remembers it. I don't know what he said. I don't know who I was making peace with other than Eddie, and Eddie and I talked, and then, we hugged afterwards. And I remember I talked to Ray too. And I think that, again, they both kind of knew that didn't come from me. I obviously would never mean to disrespect Eddie Guerrero. That guy's a legend. it was, you have to do this. And again, I was 24, so I did what Kurt Angle told me to do.
That has to be one of the most ruthless ribs of all time, knowing Eddie Guerrero's temper.
You know, he never lost his temper. Eddie was he was very cool about it. And I don't know if Kurt even meant it as a rib. He might have.
Yeah.
You know, I was naive. I was 24. But like I said, obviously I would never, and I think my exact words were like, I'm not telling Eddie Guerrero not to do anything. It's Eddie Guerrero. And that's when it was like, well, we're going to think you're a pussy if you don't. Like, it was something like that. And, you know, Sean Daivari always had a much better head on his shoulders when it came to wrestling than I did. Most of the time, he would be kind of my guidance. And in this situation, he must not have been around. Sean, I don't know if you've ever interviewed Sean. Sean has been in the business since he was like 12. Gifted wrestler, very talented. But when it came to the pair of us, again, looking back on this now, 10 years from, you know, in the future, Sean was the wrestling. He had the mind for it. And he was very in tune with what should and shouldn't be done. Me, I was always kind of feeling it out. You know, I would speak my mind sometimes when I shouldn't, and I would be quiet sometimes when I should speak my mind. So it was a learning experience for me, and everything I've done since wrestling, I feel like I've taken what I've learned from wrestling into, you know, the professional world and my next life. So I'm appreciative of it. There are plenty of things I wish I could have done over. But at the same time, I mean, it gave me confidence, and it gave me an awareness that I don't think I ever would have had if I wasn't in the situation I was in when I was 24, 25 years old.
Do you still follow any sort of wrestling or anything like that these days?
I don't. I don't. And occasionally, if I'm flipping through the channels and I'll see like New Japan's got a show. I live in Syracuse, New York. And so some of the local affiliates will pick up some shows, Ring of Honor. I'll watch a little. And I'm always into it when I watch, you know, not that I was the best wrestler in the world and I'm an expert, but, you know, you watch and you critique and you kind of like, and sometimes you're into it. But to be honest with you, I haven't spent more than 10 minutes in the last, you know, couple years watching wrestling. I don't have time these days, and it's not something that I'm into. It's a different product. You know, I think Sean Daivari said, and I really like it. I don't know how much I agree with it though. He said that you were the last of the Attitude Generation. When Muhammad Hassan was taken off the air, you know, within a relatively short period of time afterwards, wrestling started to gear more towards, you know, children and adolescents, and became more family friendly. He said that he thought the Muhammad Hassan character was the last character of the Attitude Generation, which, you know, for not, you know, I don't know if I agree or disagree, but I think it's kind of cool to hear that because of how awesome the Attitude Generation was for WWE.
I can certainly agree with it because it seems like almost in pro wrestling, WWE is afraid for their heels to be hated. And I mean, although what you were saying as that character wasn't a lie. I mean, I live in Kentucky and I see people get treated like that all the time for being different. But your character was so hated as a heel because everybody knows it goes on, but of course they don't want it thrown in their face that it happens. Everybody likes to turn a blind eye. Right. What kind of backlash did you get from fans, like when you would be out or anything like that? Did you get comments and reactions like that?
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, psychologically speaking, we despise the traits we see in others that remind us of ourselves. And I think Muhammad Hassan, the character, it put a mirror to, you know, your general American population and reminded them that even though we live in this liberal society that recognizes civil rights, and we aren't exempt from prejudice tendencies. And I think that the character itself did a great job of provoking that in people by, like you said, telling the truth, but telling a truth that people would rather deny. And so they started to see this in themselves, and the character built genuine heat, but it really wasn't too long after I started the character that people appreciated that. And that's one thing I think is a trademark of a good heel is people love to hate. They don't hate, they love to hate. And so most fans were really good. And they were positive, and I enjoyed interacting with most fans. A couple fans, and this is where we started to notice that there might be trouble in another direction, because when Muhammad Hassan got taken off the air, it really wasn't pushback from, white American audiences. It was pushback from Arab American audience who thought this character was a poor representation of them, which I can't disagree with. But it was Arab Americans or Arabs in general. I remember in Australia I had a confrontation with one who took exception to the character. One saw me drinking at a bar and was like, Arabs don't drink. And the funny thing, Muslims don't drink. And the funny thing is I'm sitting next to one drinking with me, which was Sean. So I was like, yeah, they do. But most of the backlash we got was in writing. Most of the face-to-face contact with fans was positive. But you always are going to interact with assholes regardless. I mean, that's just inherent in the position.
And I mean, you're a 100% Italian guy, right?
Yeah, I'm 100% Italian from Syracuse, New York.
I mean, you could have ended up with a Jersey Shore gimmick, I guess. So
could have, yeah. It probably would have got as much heat a couple of years later.
Yeah, I mean, Robbie E's done well with it, but it's always so interesting to me at that time. Like, I mean, that gimmick would never fly today. They would never even consider that gimmick on WWE TV today. And that it's crazy because I mean, it got a great amount of heat. It was one of the great heel characters of the era. Do you think they missed the boat by just writing the character off?
I don't know. Yes and no. I mean, they miss the boat? Yeah. I mean, they could have continued with the character. They could have been getting a lot more heat for the character. But I think it came down to, it was monetary. You're talking about, sponsors polling. I mean, after the London bombing, I think that if they would have continued the character in the same way that they had been, we had been using it for the last year after the 2005 London bombing, I think that would have been a bad move. And I think that the WWE, Vince, they recognized that they were going to start to lose sponsors if they continued with this. It wasn't like the puppies or like Gene Sinitsky with the baby. Like it wasn't a storyline that was in poor taste. It was one that represented a group of people in a way, even though Muhammad Hassan never was a radicalized fundamentalist. It was a storyline that represented a group of people that were responsible for killing innocent people. And so I think that if you step back and look at it from what's right to parody and what is crossing the line and then insensitive, I think it was becoming insensitive given the plight of the United States and of Western Europe at this time and now. Like you said, you could never do it now. Well, it started to change in 2005 as terrorist attacks became more frequent and hitting heavily populated areas and hitting Western European areas and not just, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And we'd be able to identify with it more. So just like you couldn't do it now, I think when they pulled the character, we were heading into the times where this character and this topic and this material was too insensitive to continue.
Now, one of the most ironic things about this situation, and, I read it online, so you never know if it's true. I read that you became a social studies teacher, which is, you were involved in such a social storyline, and then you're educating children on, or youth on situations such as this. Yes.
I've always been a history buff. I love history. I love social studies in general, whether that be sociology, psychology, economics, all of the social sciences I've always been very interested in, as well as education. Before I got into wrestling, education was a career that I thought it was something I was passionate about, just like I became passionate about wrestling, but my passion for education continued. And I do, and I talk about this, especially because I talk global studies. So we talk about, ancient Islam, and we talk about modern Islam and ancient Christianity and modern Christianity, and how those subject areas really have clashed. I mean, we could trace back the relations between, Western Europe and the Middle East all the way back to the Crusades, and really even further back if you know what to look for. And so teaching history and in a sense being a part of history, it's very rewarding. And at the same time, I think one of the things that made the Hassan character good was my ability and my knowledge of the past, because this isn't something that's new, and my knowledge of politics and my knowledge of modern psychology and sociology and civilization in the American society, because I had writers, but at the same time, very early on with the character, it got to the point where the writers, because it was such a popular character, we didn't know if I'd be out there for 3 minutes or 8 minutes. And so the writers may say, and Stephanie McMahon was the one who I really spoke with most often about the direction of the character, may say, you know, you need to hit this, this, and this, but they didn't script it. And so I think my social studies background, my history background, my interest in politics, and like I said, the social sciences really drove the character, because I was able to, like you said earlier, use truth as part of my gimmick. And so it was that truth that really confronted people with the reality of what was happening in 2005, which was a lot of xenophobic backlash from 2001.
Yeah, I was sitting there as I learned that. I was like, man, that had to only fuel the character. What was a guy like Vince McMahon like backstage?
I thought Vince was incredibly in control of his product, but I thought he was open to ideas. I didn't personally ever have a negative interaction with Vince. Easy guy for me to get along with. Again, personally, the way I dealt with Vince, to the extent that I dealt with him, he knows his product, he knows his fan base, he knows what he wants, and he knows how to get it there. But he's Vince McMahon. He took a conglomerate of federations and turned it into an enterprise. And there's, for all of the negative press that Vince gets, and I think some of it he used to anyway bring upon himself as part of his gimmick, because Vince is always living the gimmick. Extraordinarily brilliant businessman. And like I said, I didn't personally ever have a negative interaction. Now, the extent to which I deal with them is much less than people who've been there for 5 to 10 years. But I never personally had a negative interaction with him.
Also, I wanted to ask, what was your reaction when you were told that you'd be doing a segment with Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania?
How do you answer that? I mean, that was what got me into it. I still remember, I think I was 6 years old, Hulk slamming the Giant at WrestleMania at the Silverdome. It was by far the highlight of my career. I've obviously worked with tremendous talents. Shawn Michaels was always fantastic. Chris Jericho to wrestle. I worked with a lot of incredible guys, Kane, Undertaker. But it's Hulk Hogan. And so, not to take anything away from those guys, but it's Hulk Hogan, so it was, and I still, if I ever talk, and when I talk about this, the moment in Madison Square Garden where Hogan ran out to rescue Shawn Michaels, it was so loud. The only way I could describe it is, now I know where the expression blew the roof off the place comes from. It was so loud to be in the center of all that, in the center of that ring. You felt like you were lifting off the ground. And he was great for me to work with. Again, he was really cool. Hulk was very laid back, easy to work with. I don't know. He was great. I've heard bad stories about Hulk Hogan. I never have anything bad to say with him. His interaction with Sean and I, he was fantastic.
Just a couple more questions, and I'll let you go. What was it like working with Daivari on the angle? Obviously, he's still involved with pro wrestling and doing very well.
Sean and I have lost touch. It's a product of a busy traveling schedule if you're a wrestler, as well as, since I've been out of wrestling, I've gotten an undergraduate degree. I've got an undergraduate degree, a master's degree, a CAS, so I've been quite busy myself. But to work with Sean, like I said, Sean was great. Sean, a brilliant wrestling mind. The only problem with Sean Daivari, the only thing that is preventing Sean Daivari from being a main eventer is he needs about 5 more inches or 6 more inches in height. Because Sean's great on the mic. He's tremendous talent in the ring. He's got a great head on his shoulders when it comes to the business and in and out of the ring. Unfortunately, he wasn't gifted with, 6 foot or over. So, yeah, I'd love to see Sean get a shot at the WWE in a push. I mean, we've seen it happen with Eddie, with Ray, with Chris, but Sean was great to work with, man, and I miss Sean, and I wish we had more time to stay in touch.
Also, have you mentioned you've been contacted by other promotions. Has this happened anytime recently, and are you able to say which promotions contacted you?
No, it hasn't been recent. I can't remember the last time I was contacted. I've been asked to do a couple appearances. I've done maybe 1 or 2, but as far as wrestling goes, I can't remember, and I can't remember the federation either.
Have you ever wrestled a match since leaving WWE?
I have not. My last match was Undertaker in Buffalo. I've never stepped in a ring since then.
That's quite the way to go out if you're going to go out.
Yeah, exactly, man. You see, like not to compare, but like Derek Jeter, final at bat, But no, you don't top that. And like I said, I made the conscious decision that when I was done with wrestling, I was done with wrestling. And so I haven't been back since.
So that being said, if WWE contacted you for like a one-off appearance or something like that, is that something you consider?
I guess it depends on in what capacity. I stay in shape. I'm definitely not out of shape. I'm not in ring shape. I'm definitely not in as good a shape as I was when I was 25. So it depends on what capacity. But I think that they've moved on from the Hassan character, and because of the negativity that surrounded it, I think that they're happy to continue to move on from it.
Also, do you have any other projects, social media, anything like that you want to promote for the fans? I mean, obviously you seem like a private dude. You haven't been involved in the wrestling spotlight, but yeah, anything you want to promote?
I don't. My life, it's very different these days. I got into education about 5 years ago, and I became a teacher. And like I said, I got my master's, my CAS, and now I'm a building administrator. And my passion is working with kids. It's in education. It's in, New York State education, which is one of the more complicated and bureaucratic systems in the country. And, I'd like to continue to advance in that field. So right now that's my focus. And I don't have any other projects. I mean, it sounds, I know it's a strange story. I understand it's an interesting story. Like I said, when I detached from wrestling, I made the decision that I was going in another direction. And I think it's very dangerous to spend your present looking into your past. So I choose to look to the future. And so everything I do now is focused on that. And like I said, I working with kids and, trying to make this state and this country a better place, one kid at a time, I guess, to be a little pie in the sky about it.
Yeah, something I want our listeners to know before we go. So often in the business that I'm in, people contact us for interviews, or I'll contact them because I know they have something to push. You didn't have anything to push. I just aggressively pursued this interview because, like I said, given the social situation in America and really the world, and how your character went over and how it ended and how you disappeared from the spotlight, I thought it was just such an interesting thing. And obviously, like I said, you're teaching now. You're molding minds. I'm
a building administrator. I'm a vice principal now.
Well, there you go. You're a vice principal, and it molds minds, and I think it's a truly intriguing, and it's you don't often see happy endings in stories like this, and you have a happy ending right now, as of right now.
But you're right, and like I said, I mean, I know a few guys who, for the most part, have left wrestling and pursued other careers. Johnny Jeter is a CPA. He's an accountant. I don't know if you remember Spirit Squad.
Yeah, of course.
Chris Pavone, his name was something Cage. I can't. Oh my God, I can't. I'm drawing a blank right now. He was Chris Cage in OVW. Caden, maybe.
Caden Croft. Or
there
Caden
you go.
Croft, was that?
Yeah, Caden Croft. He's teaching. He's an art teacher in Florida. These are some of the guys I stay in touch with. Mike Bucci's running a bank in Louisville. I'm sure you know all about him. He's still involved in wrestling. But it does happen. But I think with Caden, with Jeter, and even to a certain extent with Mike, you have to make that decision that wrestling is either going to be part-time or non-existent, because it's an all-consuming business. And if you focus on wrestling, you don't have the opportunity to move on to a different field like we did. So, again, that's why I don't do a lot of interviews and I don't do the appearances, but in another world, in another life, like I'm in now in the field of education, I'm all over the place. So it's, like I said, I switched, and when I made that decision, it was all of me that switched, not part of me.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. Like I said, I know you've moved away from wrestling, and as I mentioned, guys, like I can't properly explain how much I badgered him for this interview. It's been several months that I've been like, I got to get this interview. It's one of the most intriguing, one of the most intriguing stories. But thank you so much, and of course, we wish you luck in everything that you do, and hopefully, we get to speak to you again sometime.
You know what, Sean? Every once in a while, I like to do these interviews. So no, you didn't badger me too bad. So I'm glad to do it. And who knows, in the future, maybe I'll try to do a couple more of them. I don't know how much interest there is in the character these days, but again, I'm appreciative for fans and anybody who still supports me. And like I said, I've moved on, but at the same time, there's still a place in my heart for wrestling. Obviously, is a big part of my life.
One thing before we go, fans sometimes don't understand the rigors that pro wrestlers go to, even with a short run in WWE. Was there anything else that led to you walking away from wrestling?
Well, on top of what we've already spoken about, one thing that happens even in a short career, like you said, is you really rack up a lot of injuries. I've been out of wrestling for 10 years now, and between my back, my shoulder, even some head injuries, I still feel it. I still know on a daily basis, especially I live in New York, when I'm shoveling my driveway, that I used to be involved in a physical activity that really amounts to a minor car crash every night. That's what being a wrestler is. And so, as I stopped wrestling for a while and I felt this and I knew that, my body was different, it always would be, I kind of weighed the situation. You have a short shelf life as a wrestler. Very few, like I said earlier, very few people make it long in the business. And one of the main reasons is injuries. And so, given my career, being in the WWE was maybe a year, but I was at OVW for 3 or 4, practice every day. I didn't think that there was a beneficial or positive long-term outcome for me, especially, like I said, with all the injuries that I had already racked up. And so that was a major deciding factor. And like I said, the injuries still plague me today. I still feel these injuries. They still have a direct impact on my daily life. I still see doctors for these injuries. So it's again, everybody's aware of this now, but it's not all the glamour that it's sparked to be. There is a lot of, detriments to your personal health that you assume when you become a wrestler, even though you don't really know how great that may be. No one tells you, because they can't tell you the kind of injuries you're going to accumulate and how that's going to affect you later in life. And so, when I made that decision, like I said, that was a major contributing factor, is the cons of the injuries outweighed the benefits of the pros of staying in wrestling. And so that was another major reason why I chose to leave.
What would you say was the worst injury you sustained as a pro wrestler, or was it just everything that built up?
I'd say the one that bothers me the most now is my neck and my back especially. I had a few situations where I was, concussed. And there's studies. I know Chris Nowinski does great work in Massachusetts, and I know there's a lot of attention from the NFL. But a lot of it is just nagging physical injuries that limit my ability to do a lot of things. Like I said, it's difficult to shovel the driveway. It's difficult to be on my knees. I have a child, playing with my young child. Just everything starts to tighten up. I've done physical therapy. I've done what I can. I still work out as much as I can and try to stay strong and fit. But you can't narrow it to just one. It's just the general broad drain that it places on your body.
Before we go, what would you like to say to the fans, and how do you want to be remembered as a WWE performer? Or do you?
Oh, I do. I'm under no delusion that my character is, again, as I live in an era of many, many tremendous entertainers and wrestlers, I guess I would like to be remembered, or my character be remembered, as somebody who came in, has a major impact, made people think, challenged people's perceptions, made the product a little better when I was there, and left before I could see my career decline. I mean, I went out on top. And not that was by design, but after the fact, I was always aware of that. That's why that was another, thing that made me not want to come back. Is I kind of peaked. I peaked early. I peaked quick. I maybe wasn't ready for it, but I peaked and had an impact while I was there.
Well, I definitely want to thank you. You've been incredibly candid. You have been a great interview subject. I mean, this is, as I mentioned earlier, an interview I really wanted because I was so intrigued by the character, and not only the character, the person behind the character. So thank you very much for joining us, and we definitely hope to speak to you again sometime.
Thank you very much, Sean. I appreciate it.